Well, I am so honored to be here today and share my story with you. I came all the way from California to talk to you folks today, and I just ask that you give me grace. It's not easy to stand up here and tell my story. And if I say anything to offend you, please forgive me and just allow the Holy Spirit to work on your heart. When I was a little girl, I was full of life. I was very animated and creative. And I used to write poetry all the time, especially about Jesus. Because the first 8 years of my life, I grew up in Sunday school. Every Sunday I went to Sunday school and learned about Jesus and how much he loved me and how he died for my sins. I fell in love with him at a very young age. But in my home life, there wasn't the love of Christ. My dad was a workaholic and very distant. He was a good man, but he didn't know how to reach out to me as a daughter. I don't remember ever sitting on his lap or hearing, "Princess, I love you. You're made for great things. God has so many awesome things planned for you." There was nothing like that. And my mother was a Pentecostal preacher's daughter, and she loved to nag. And she nagged me to death. Well, I grew up basically raised on television and developed very harmful, negative thinking because our family never really did anything together. We were like this functional, dysfunctional family who everybody thought was Christian. And when I turned 9 years old, we actually made a move to another city, so I lost all my church friends. I lost my role models in my life, what I did have going on. I went to a new place where my dad started a business and became even more of a workaholic, and my mother joined him, and they were really into that. They stopped attending church regularly and stayed home and watched Christian television. And I went to the Corner Baptist Church once in a while. Brought my little sister and brother with me. But otherwise, everything in my family had just kind of dissipated around 9 years old. At the same time, I also had a very traumatic experience. When I was 9 years old, a teenage boy and his sister sexually abused me. It was very horrific. And I carried a lot of shame and guilt from that. I had my first homosexual experience at 9 years old, and my first sexual experience at 9 years old with a boy. And so it was pretty traumatic. I remember running all the way home in shock. And I couldn't tell my parents because we didn't communicate anyways. If I tell my mom anything, she would just tell me, "Clean your room." I mean, it was always about, doing what she said. So I just held this in for years. I began to masturbate at 9 years old. Felt very shameful and dirty, but that was just the way it's pretty normal for a child who's been sexually abused to act out. I didn't even really know what I was doing. I just knew that that's how I acted out. As I grew older, I began to act out with boys quite a bit because I was seeking that male approval. I was desperate. I just remember as a child being desperate for attention, just anybody who could pay attention to me. Every time I tried to say something, my mother would interrupt me and go, "No, no, 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 no." It was just really hard. I had no advocate as a child, no one on my side. So I began to develop a defense mechanism as a child, already getting tough. So by the time I was a teenager, I was pretty tough. Nobody told me what to do. And I began to argue with my mother every single day. In my life, in my teenage years, it was constant arguing every single day. It was terrible. My dad would come home and then she'd chase him down the street, tell him everything bad I ever did that day. And then she would tell me, "I don't even know if I love you." I mean, she rarely even said, "I love you" anyways. So what was the difference? By then I was a hardened teenager on my way to a criminal lifestyle. At 16 years old, I even went to jail for stealing. I started drinking alcohol, smoking pot, having sex with boys because I loved the attention. I figured out real quick that if I had sex with them, I'd get attention. And I was desperate. Well, my dad said, "Shelley, if you don't get your act together, I'm going to kick you out. I'm going to kick you out of this house." I'm like, "Yeah, right, whatever." I was this rebellious teenager who Madonna had just become her new mother. Madonna just came out with her new album, and I was unlike a virgin with all the boys, and I thought I was that, wearing stupid big fluffy skirts and pumps and red lips and black nails and white hair. But my parents let me do all that. I dressed up as a Playboy bunny on Halloween, and my mom took the pictures at 15 years old. Let's maintain peace in the home. Let her do what she wants to maintain peace. Right. I got 3 daughters, and I guarantee you ain't none of them dressing up like a Playboy bunny. My parents were naive, clueless, and my mom always said they always tried to bury their heads in the sand because they just couldn't deal with it. Instead of being honest and getting real and going to get help, they chose to ignore it and ignore me. And I became full of rage. So my dad told me when I turned 18 years old and I had just barely graduated high school, barely, and I cheated my way because I was pretty smart, actually. That day came and my dad says, "Get out." Where am I going to go? Get out. And I just remember being in such a shock. Like, I can't believe my own father would do this to me. I can't explain it to you except for a whole identity just gets cut off, completely severed. Any little bit of connection I had with them was totally severed at that moment. And I was so full of anger, I just went, fine. And then pride arose in me. I'll never, ever come back here again. And I just grabbed my clothes and a Bible. Yes, I still love God. And I had no money, no food, nothing. I just went down to the corner and called somebody I had just met a few weeks back who happened to live in the San Fernando Valley in California, which is the porn capital of the world. I had no idea the destiny that Satan had waiting for me. God has a destiny for your children. Satan has a destiny for your children. Who will win, you or the world? I ended up sitting on a curb in San Fernando Valley just crying my eyes out because I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I had never known what it was like to be hungry. I grew up in a middle-class white home. I just sat there crying, going, oh my gosh, God, what am I going to do? Where are you, Jesus? Jesus, what are we doing? No answer. I'm just sitting there in shock, and all of a sudden this man, he just saw me crying, and this man came up to me and put his arm around me, and it felt so good. He was older, and it just felt so good, what I always wanted my whole life. And he said, honey, I can help you. There's a man in the apartment complex up the street who thinks you're real pretty, and for $35, you can get paid that if you make love with him. I'm like, whoa, I'm a lot of things. I've been called slut before, but I'm not a prostitute. But then very clearly I heard the devil speak to me, and he said, God doesn't care. Your parents don't care. And I thought, yeah, why should I care? And I stopped caring about myself at that moment. And a life of prostitution began for me. I started working on the streets, doing horrible sex acts. I would walk into mechanic shops and tell me I want a blowjob for $50. I just became like this survivor, this whore, just living on the streets so I could have money for food. Well, I got sick of the pimp and I started to get smart. Yeah, girls in the sex industry, we get real smart real fast because it's all about survival. And I met a madam who said, come live with me in my exotic home, and we pull like 10 to 15 tricks a day, and I'll teach you everything. And so she became my new mother. And the madam even taught me about personal hygiene, which my mother never taught me. The madam taught me how to manipulate and con men out of every last dollar, how to get exactly what I wanted from a man. And I loved it because I got all the attention I ever wanted, and I got to control and abuse men because I was angry at my father for what he had done to me, and I swore that every man would pay. This is the attitude of all the women in the sex industry. We